I have an announcement, which is that Fraser and Dieter, who are a leading international tax and advisory practice supporting some of the UK's most innovative life sciences and technology companies with their UK and international tax planning, are sponsoring this webinar. Fraser and Dieter currently work with around 400 companies in the UK life science and technology industries through their offices in London and Cambridge. And you'll find their details on our website if you think that you might benefit from their services. So now it's a pleasure to introduce Dr. Alan Marchington, who is the Managing Director and Head of Life Sciences at ICG. And Alan's got an enormous wealth of investment experience to share with us today. And he's been hugely supportive to PCR and the Proven Connect programme as a specialist advisor to the charity for the past 4 years. So thank you for that, Alan. And thank you for being with us today.
So, as I say, Alan Marchington, Head of Life Sciences. I'm at ICG. Really quick advert on ICG. We're a FTSE 100 company listed on the London Stock Exchange. We're one of the leading alternative asset managers in primarily private markets with about $100 billion under management. Sadly, not all of that is for life sciences, but a fair proportion. In terms of the team that I look after and work with, the ICG Life Sciences team is shown on this page. Just to say that all of us have industry experience. So we're all formerly pharmaceutical and industry execs. As you can see, the names there, I'm ex-Pfizer, but GSK, Biogen, AstraZeneca, etc. We've been CEOs as well of our own businesses. So we've started our own companies and grown them and successfully sold them. We're also investors as well. So we've worked with a number of the household names that many of you are probably familiar with in investing. I've been an investor the last 20 years, and we've had a track record of success in terms of investing in successful companies. So enough of the adverts. Let's move on to the topic of the day. So what is venture capital and why is it important? Well, what actually is venture capital? Anybody can be a venture capitalist. Your grandma can give you, £50,000 to start your idea, and in return you give her some equity. Then she's a venture capitalist. She's exchanging cash for shares, and that's really what it's about. But it's also about long-term capital. And it's about having a business partner. So it's a little bit more than that. And generally, when you think about a venture capitalist, they're a partner, and you should always think of them as a partner rather than somebody you work for. It's definitely a partnership, and we truly believe it's a partnership in working in that way. But they're usually quite hands-on as well. So before you take venture capital, and if you think you want venture capital, then it's worth just thinking about that and giving it a few considerations. I'll talk about some of those in a second. So maybe just to reflect on why the importance of venture capital. And when you think about some of I work in the therapeutic space, but if you think about some of the new drugs that are developed, as you can see from this chart, there's 2 bars on this chart. And the first one is where the NCEs that were approved between 2011 and 2016 originally came from. And as you can see, a vast proportion of them in the green box originated from small biotech companies, which were most of them funded by VCs. But who they were marketed by actually completely switches. And the marketeer is the dark blue, is the light blue, is the blue line, which is the pharmaceutical company. So as you can see, a lot of innovation comes from these companies, which ultimately end up with the drugs that we see, the prescription pharmaceuticals that we see on the market today. Also, an important part of venture is the charity sector. And this is really somewhat underappreciated. And there's a few areas, and we're very, very focused in this space, actually, because what we see is a huge resource and an opportunity to develop products for key diseases. And so, first of all, we see working with charities as a way of accessing new deal opportunities and investing in great companies that will make an impact in patients' lives. And so here, prostate cancer research is one of those charities that we work with closely, and looking at some of the companies that Proven Connect help to nurture and build out. But we also see it's a way to get access to patients, and really understand the patient journey in much more detail. I think it's so important when you're thinking about developing a new product, a new medicine, that you think about the journey for the patients and what really troubles them and what are their challenges beyond the disease itself. And I think that gives you much more compassion and much more understanding of the types of products that you need to develop. And it also helps on another level is just the identification of patients in what we're doing. And finally, it's about working with the charities as we invest in those companies to actually bring those products to the patient and make that impact. And impact for us is very important in what we're doing. And so working with charities is a very important part of our day-to-day work. So you're thinking of starting a company, sorry, I flicked over one slide too many there. Where do you go for capital? You have an idea, and where do you go? And there's different sources of capital that you can think about. As you say, there's your grandmother, which it could be your angel investor who can put in up to, even over £1 million they can invest. And typically that's at the startup stage. And that's an area that you can go to. And they're very open to high risk. They're very local, and they really will provide you. They may not be an expert in your space, but they will provide you the money to get started and get going. Another flavor is the corporate VC. So the corporate venture capital company, these have different flavors. So some of the corporate venture capital companies will really focus on strategic alignment with what the corporation's doing. So what area is the pharmaceutical company particularly focused on? The corporate arm will align with that and explore other ideas and other approaches to those types of therapeutic areas. Or they may say, we want to explore a new area and use the corporate venture arm to do that. Corporate venture arm could put in a lot of money, and they have some wonderful experience, and they can really bring hands-on experience to your company and to the board. And they're industry professionals who've developed the products. The next one on the list, or the third one along here, is the venture capitalist. And really the VC is somebody who can invest anything from £1 million up to £50 million. In our particular fund, our typical sweet spot is somewhere between 15 million up to 50 million. Others, it may be between 5 and 10. And so it is worth understanding that, and I'll come back to that in a second. Generally, they've been investors for a long time. They've seen a lot of investments, so they've seen what can go wrong. They have a lot of experience of that, but they want to be hands-on, and they want to ensure that they're going to get a return. So they may want to sit on the board. They may want to get more controls, and they will structure the deals such that they will probably get their money out first before any of the founders will get their money out. And so that is worth just bearing in mind in how the cap table's constructed and how the share capital is made up, maybe with preference shares and ordinary shares. And that's worth just thinking about. And then finally, the last column is private equity. And private equity, with venture, they generally invest in syndicates. So you get more than one venture capitalist coming together and sitting around your board table. That can be quite good because you get different opinions and you generally get a good answer. It can also be very difficult if people start to disagree at the board. In private equity, generally private equity wants to own 80, 90% of the business. And so you've got one owner, one person to deal with, maybe one or two people to deal with, but all from the same company that you work with to grow those businesses. The amount of capital they provide is generally much larger, and typically they're focused on revenue stage businesses where venture will focus much earlier. And so there are different flavors. And so depending upon the type of business that you want to build and the direction you're going in, really determines who you are and where you go for that money and how that actually works. Sorry, I've got a problem with my mouse here. Let me just try and get in the right direction. And so also you may think about your, if you look at this is a drug discovery process, but you could have a similar graph for medical devices or diagnostics. But the amounts of capital grow from the pre-seed stage, which may be 50, 100K, which may be your angel investor, or maybe a venture investor who wants to go very early, to the seed phase, which is the discovery and the animal validation of whatever the approach is, to then when you start getting into clinical trials and scaling up, where you probably need to bring venture capital in to actually grow those businesses. And then finally, at the end in the far right, when perhaps you're going to market, when you may want to go onto the public market, or you may want to, as you're generating revenues, actually look at private equity to get your exit and get out of those deals. And as you can see, as you move from left to right, the products are maturing, probably the management team's maturing, the board's maturing through that process, and you're bringing on additional expertise, and venture capital can certainly help you bring on expertise to be able to do some of these things. So how does a venture capital fund actually work? Well, there's lots of different ways, but what I've put on this slide is just a diagrammatic view of a couple of different structures. So the first structure is what I put called fund type 1. So in the center is the venture capital fund. Well, of course, the fund is the manager. So that's what's called the GP, the general partner. But the GP actually manages the fund. And what the fund does, what the general partner does, it goes out to LPs who are limited partners in the fund. So the fund is generally a partnership structure, and you have limited partners and a general partner. The general partner is the manager, the limited partners are the investors. And so you go to financial institutions, sovereign wealth funds, etc., pension funds, etc., as shown on the top, and they invest in the fund, and they are LPs in the fund. They're limited partners in the fund. The fund is managed by the GP, who's the general partner. And the fund structure is, there's lots of different structures you can have, but generally the fund structure is typically a 10-year fund. So the fund has a 10-year lifetime and usually has typically a 5-year investment period. So the GP will invest the capital it receives from the LPs over 5 years. Now, it may not invest all the capital, but it will make all its investments. All its investments will be in those first 5 years. And then there's a run-off period in 5 years, which makes up the 10-year total, where the venture capitalist is then trying to get exits and returns. So the returns may happen in the first 5, but you give yourself an additional 5 years to make those returns. Beyond the investment period, you can't make any new investments, but you can continue to fund your existing investments as you go. Now, limited partners commit for the whole 10 years, and a general partner will go to the limited partner and say, we will give you this return, so this internal rate of return, IRR, and this multiple of invested capital, MOIC, on this fund. And so the goal of the GP, the goal of the manager, is to hit those returns. So when you're trying to raise money from a venture capitalist, you have to make their return targets that they've told their LPs they're going to hit. So, you know, I have people I have got to answer to that I've told we're going to hit a certain return target, and we're going to return all their money plus that return target within a 10-year time period. And so when you're thinking about talking to LPs, those are the sort of considerations that you want to think about. And we'll come on to that in a second. And so the venture capital fund via the GP makes the investments in the companies shown at the bottom. The companies then sell. They either IPO on NASDAQ or in the London market. They make returns. That money then flows to the venture capital fund that then flows back to the partners. And it's set up as a partnership structure for tax reasons, in that partnerships are actually a see-through vehicle. So they're transparent for tax. Otherwise, when a company exits, the fund would have to pay tax on that exit, and then you pass that money back to the LP, and the LP would have to pay tax on the exit also. And so they're a transparent structure for tax. The other type of fund is shown on the other side, which is fund type 2. And these are generally open-ended structures. So that was a closed-end structure, a 10-year fund. There's an open-ended structure, which is more of a listed vehicle. So think about things like Syncona, who's listed on the London Stock Exchange. It's an evergreen fund, and their investors have invested in Syncona and have provided them capital. They have that capital, and they use the capital to invest in companies. When they make an exit, that money goes back onto their balance sheet, and so the Syncona increases in value which will increase the share price of Syncona. And so investors then make a return on that. That Syncona is one example. There are lots of other listed companies on the London Stock Exchange in the US that do this, but they have very different limitations on their timeline for investment. So they don't have this 5-year investment period. They generally can invest at any point in time, depending on how much capital they have and how much reserves they have. So those are just two different types of structures, the most common structures that you tend to see. There are others, so this isn't the whole limitation, but just to give you the most common types of venture capital funds that you see. But one of the key things to understand when you think about those structures is when you go and talk to a venture capitalist to raise money from them, is where are they in their fund? There's some key questions that you want to ask is, first of all, where do they get their money from? So who's actually behind them? Who's backing them? Is there a risk? An example maybe quite topical is maybe the recent crisis in Ukraine and Russia. Are the backers from that going to be involved in that disagreement, and therefore the money may not appear? That may be something to think about, but not always the case. I don't know any examples of that, but I'm just sort of thinking from the top of my head that it's good to know who's behind some of these funds. And how do they deploy their capital? So do they do lots of little investments, or do they do a few large investments? So do they do 10 or 15 large investments, or maybe 30 small investments? Also think about where they are in their fundraising cycle. So if they're in year 5 of their investment period, that means that generally they only have probably 5 years to invest in your company, grow it, and make a return for their LPs, because they have a 5-year runoff period. If they're in year 1 of their fund, then they have 9 years to invest and make that return. And so there's very different points in the cycle that's worth a consideration. Now, LPs do make exceptions. They do give extensions to GPs. So the 10-year isn't the drop dead date. It can go beyond that. But that is just something as consideration that you may want to think about if you're going talking to LPs. And then also, what's their investment mandate? So are they just solely life sciences? Are they within life sciences? Are they just solely diagnostics, or just solely medtech or therapeutics? It's no good going to a fund that just does medtech with a therapeutics deal, and vice versa. And then a big question is this person's going to be your partner in your company and the partner in the company that you're growing? So what's their experience of this space? What have they done previously? Have they done this previously? Have they worked with charities previously? Maybe a key question for you, and their understanding of your structure and your limitations and what you can do, and to ensure that you're comfortable in working with those people. And also, do they have the necessary skill sets to build these businesses and grow these businesses and the right companies? And that really goes to how they work with the companies as well. And also, take references, talk to other people, see who else they've worked with, and see what else they've done, because I think that's a great way of evaluating different investors in what you're doing. The one other thing I would say is the UK is very strong in this space. And so when you look at this slide, what is shown at the bottom is the European countries, and at the left-hand side on the y-axis is the value and the amount of money that's been raised in life sciences in these areas. And as you can see, this is back from 2012 to 2022 data. We're going to hopefully get some data just to update this, but the picture is not that different. As you can see, the UK really dominates in attracting venture capital in life sciences in what it's doing. And really, more than France and Germany put together don't even match, and France and Switzerland don't even match how much is invested in the UK at the moment. So what are the advantages of the venture industry? I think there's a few things. So venture capital understands the risks. So the risk is the risk game. I think we understand the risk well. We understand that we may lose all our money. And so the security angle is not required that you may see with others that want you to co-invest alongside them. I think one of the big things is about the networks is that we're doing this all the time, and we have very broad and strong networks of people who can help to grow these businesses. And across a different range of areas, we actually, interact with a lot of people, both in the UK, across Europe, and in the US, that we can actually draw on. We're also very good links with the pharmaceutical industry in terms of talking to them all the time and understanding what they're looking for and what they have, and what we have in terms of what we're delivering. Not just in Europe and the US, but in China and in Japan, etc., is a rich area for us. Where else I think venture can really help is also bring in other investors. So people like to syndicate, people like to co-invest with people. So bringing capital from the US and bringing other investors from continental Europe can also be super helpful. So help to syndicate and help to exit those deals. I think where the downsides are of venture are really, it's a very competitive process. And it takes a lot of time with a lot of questions. The diligence can be quite torturous sometimes and quite frustrating. Raising money, when I was a CEO, I hated it, because you spend all your time raising money and not focusing on the day-to-day business. And actually what you want to do is just get on with the business instead of raising money. But it's obviously a CEO's key job is not to run out of capital. So that is the main thing that you need to do, and you need to accept that. The other part is people say, oh, venture capital guys, they put in so much money and we get diluted down to nothing. I think looking down the other end of the telescope of that argument is really no, but the whole company becomes of much more value. So your equity becomes much more valuable, and you're providing the opportunity to actually grow that business and really get products to the market. And so in some respects, I think what you're actually doing is providing the opportunity to really grow and build a business and get products to patients, which you may not get normally. Too many investors can be problematic around the board table, so you need to make sure investors get on and that they're aligned. Alignment is key. The other thing is you lose control of your business, and for a founder that is quite hard. That there may be steps, and as you grow those businesses and they mature, that CEOs and CSOs may need to change and grow with that business. And I think that's quite a difficult conversation, but I think good investors can handle that well, and also ensure that people are truly recognized for the contribution they've made, and that recognition continues further down the line in what they're doing. I think what VCs look for is really, it's the usual. It's great management, although typically the deals we see, management isn't fully formed, and we can help build out that management. There's a company that we're doing at the moment where we're supplying the chief medical officer and partly a CEO in that business. But equally, we're happy with great management teams and don't want to interfere if it's working well. Intellectual properties are important to us, and obviously protecting the inventions that are being made. Budgets and plans, but again, we can help build those. And market, that they actually developing a product for a market that is actually sufficient and is actually, there's a real unmet need there. As we look at it, we really think about unmet need, and that there's a real impact from the products that are being developed. The science is key for us. Generally, we start with the science. I think that's important for us. Investor base aligned and that, but and you can see a path to the exit, and you can see a path to exit in the timelines of your fund is important for us as well. So I think I've been through a lot of this actually, is understand your VCs. So do your homework, make sure you're talking to plenty of them, target the right ones so that you're going at the right stage for your company and you understand that. I think with a pitch deck, sometimes we see technology looking for a solution rather than looking what's the product, what's the product ultimately going to look like that you're targeting here, and how does that develop? Some people are okay with technology looking for a solution. That's not where we are. We generally look, what's the end goal? What's the patient that you're trying to make an impact towards? And work on building the relationships. We talk to people very early on. Typically, a lot of our investments are at the clinical stage, but we're happy to talk to people much earlier to build that relationship, get to understand the products, get to understand the science, and doing what we want to, and see that the milestones have been met. So finally, where are we? I think VC is really important part of the UK. You've got to ask yourself a question if you're a founder, is it really appropriate for your business? If you want to do a business with maybe as a CRO, you may not need venture capital. You may just need a loan from the bank, and that may be better. And it's a cheaper source of capital, and you may keep a lot of the equity for yourself. It's worth thinking about that. I think always try and bring a VC on that brings more than money, who can bring experience and really understand their drivers and their parameters. I think, you know, everyone's pretty open about what they're targeting, where they want to invest and what they're looking for. I think the final thing for anybody who's starting a company, and I've been there, is you've got to enjoy it. It's got to be fun. It's going to be hard work. But with hard work and fun, you'll generally build a wonderful company with great people and great products that are going to really make a difference. So with that, I'll stop and just say thanks very much. And thanks again to Sonia and Jane and the Proven Connect team. Really appreciate just being able the opportunity to talk to them. Thank you.